You're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. I'm Bill McIntyre here with Jon Gallo for another edition of this week's Long Island News, the news show that brings you news stories about Long Island and about Long Islanders. We have a lot to talk about today. We have some guests. Obviously, I think the first thing that's on everybody's mind is the price of gasoline.
Yeah, and what's going on in Ukraine and how it all kind of impacts locally here. So
yeah,
I think we'll start out there on the economic and then kind of broach out on it, Bill. So.
Okay, we got a story here out of Washington. Propelled by surging costs for gasoline, food, and housing, consumer inflation jumped 7.9% over the past year, the sharpest spike Americans have seen since 1982, and likely only a harbinger of even higher prices to come. The increase reported Thursday by the Labor Department reflected the 12 months ending in February and did not include most of the oil and gas price increases that followed Russia's invasion of the Ukraine on February 24th. Since then, the average gas prices nationally have jumped about 62 cents a gallon to $4.32, according to AAA. Even before the war, further accelerated price increases, robust consumer spending, solid pay raises, and persistent supply shortages had sent U.S. inflation to its highest level in 4 decades. So what is more, housing costs, which make up about a third of the government's consumer price index, have risen sharply, a trend that is unlikely to reverse anytime soon.
Yeah, that is unfortunate, and I think everyone kind of sees that. They might not know the exact percentages, but if you go to the pump, if you're going to your store, wherever you are, you're seeing this happen in real time, of course, so That's not news to you. But the fact is that we are getting to historic proportions, and I'll mention that in Long Island specifically, the gas prices are expected right about as we're speaking to break the all-time record here on Long Island for prices. Right. Some experts say we could be seeing $5 a gallon, within maybe the next weeks or months, depending. But point is that Long Island gas does typically run about 20 to 25 cents higher than the national average that Bill just mentioned. But overall, right now, as of Monday, rather, when it was last reported, it was $4.26, a little more for a gallon on Long Island, according to AAA, which is very close to now that record high of $4.34. So we're expected to break that, and all those factors that you kind of laid out into everything else are what we're attributing to this. So it's certainly having its reverb effect, this war. And to that point, as most may have heard already, President Biden has announced a ban on Russian oil imports. Yeah. And he did say straight out in those comments that, in terms of economic impact, people are still going to feel it and feel it maybe even more so now than ever. But this is, part of a global strategic effort to, address what's happening in Ukraine, the war, the violence, the destruction. We can't really, it seems like, engage in a direct war for a lot of reasons, nor maybe should we. That's a different discussion. But the point is that, this is one way through sanctions and through economic tariffs and, import embargoes that, these things are done. And, we're kind of just in between, but less so than obviously the civilians caught up in the humanitarian crisis over there. So I know, Bill, I think
one of the questions is whether or not, is this just the perfect storm, John? I mean, we had supply problems just before, Russia invaded Ukraine. And those supply problems were blamed for higher costs because, companies said, well, we got to make up. We missed a ship. We had all of those barges in the bay, I guess in California. They had them off the coast lining up just to get unloaded. And the result of that, you couldn't get certain things, even Amazon deliveries, which are usually pretty quick. So, they took a hit too. So it took them a while. But all these things are being blamed for the rise in gasoline prices.
Well, to your point, I know we had this conversation with Stu Leonard, the founder of the popular grocery store chain, supermarket chain out here and out of Westchester. That was during the November period. And, people were talking about inflation. It was kind of, rising to the top of the news cycles and, people wondering, could they get Christmas trees because of supply chain issues? People worried about the computer chips still in their cars and other things, obviously, that require them. So that has been at play. The pandemic has been at play. We're going to talk with Mark Harrington, Newsday's energy chief reporter, in a little while, and I'm sure he can kind of give a little more nuance to some of those factors, before the crisis here, before the war, that have just kind of been exacerbated.
Right.
But just speaking to what is happening here on the ground with this Russian oil embargo, more or less, it is important to note that generally we do import about 700,000 barrels of oil per day from Russia, but that is a fraction of only the 20 million barrels consumed by the U.S. So there is in the Newsday piece that's been published recently, a pretty good chart where it shows you that we really do drill and extract and process a lot, up there at the very top of global suppliers. But proportionally to what we use, it's a whole other story.
One of the things that I discovered looking at some of this stuff is that it was been brought up that the reason we always take a hit with gasoline is because we refine heavy oils. We don't actually do the refining that results in a lot of gasoline, which is why we buy so much and import so much. It's a matter of the kind of oils that America can actually process. They made that decision when they put up the refineries. Or we're either going to make gas, or we're going to do home heating fuel, or we're going to do, and apparently they don't do a lot of the thing that we're short in now.
Yeah, that is certainly, part of this process here.
We're pointing to all of these other things as why we don't have enough gasoline, and it's supply and demand, obviously. And you wonder, did they pick that way to go so that the price could remain relatively high, even when it's down in the $2, range? They probably realize, a gallon of this stuff is only worth about a quarter. But we're getting $2, so let's keep it where it is.
Different, petroleum, kind of ratings and purposes.
If you control
petroleum products,
if you control the supply, if you control the supply of any one of those derivatives of oil, you got a gold mine.
No, of course that's a lot of the spaces, and to that point, we are talking now to Venezuela, places that we haven't really had very good relationships with in the past because we have worse relationships now with Russia. So trying to see, how not just America, but Europe in particular, because they're much more dependent on Russian oil and natural gas than we are here in the States. But that goes into the discussion. Again, we'll have with Mark Harrington, this push for renewables, the push for solar, the push for domestic production. So you're not kind of caught in the windfalls of what happens, globally with some dictator somewhere. But that said, I do want to mention just quickly here also, we can't lose sight of the humanitarian crisis, what's happening. There is a lot of, conflicting reporting. There's a lot of misinformation. This is a war that a lot are saying has been, in real time documented more than any other in human history. HD video, GoPros, 4K, all that type of stuff. It is certainly a disturbing and fascinating, historical kind of moment. And we can't lose sight of the fact that, the UN and other human rights and refugee agencies do expect 4 million plus people to flee that country. It's a massive country. The fact is that already about 2 million people approximately have left. The government, the leaders are still in country, a majority of them. It's not a government in exile right now. The men have been basically conscripted to stay in country to fight, kind of a resistance war. Many women are staying and fighting as well. Many refugees are trying to leave through, humanitarian corridors, which are very, very, we'll say, tentative. And there's reports of, them only lasting an hour before civilians start getting shelled. So it is certainly a disaster. And economics is part of this, but it is certainly not the main part for any of those people.
And
it shouldn't be.
It was about 2 days ago, the number was 20,000. And that's people from other countries who have gone to Ukraine to help them fight. So we're up to 20,000, and there are some pretty celebrated warriors. I think that there's a guy
popular
from
boxers.
There's a guy from Canada who is like supposedly the number one sniper in the world, and he kissed his wife goodbye and said, "I'll be back," and he's going to Ukraine.
World heavyweight boxers. One of the world champion boxers, I don't remember what weight class, his brother is the mayor of one of those major cities over there, I think the second biggest city. So it is a very, strange time. And, the point is that there are a lot of charities locally doing different things. Some may have heard some of the high profile things. County Executive Blakeman has put out a call and is in an interesting legal position to try to collect guns to send overseas, which is certainly caught up in a process of customs and may not be the best way, and certainly is not the only way to donate. Obviously, there's resources, money, but a lot of the local parishes, we do have a pretty sizable Ukrainian population out here in Nassau, on Long Island, and specifically globally, we have the biggest Ukrainian population in New York State, other than in Ukraine. So point is that, look for the local parishes. A lot of the local elected officials from the county and from also the state are doing fundraisers, and they're getting, resources, things that are needed like food, those daily kind of everyday needs to folks who are fleeing, coming across the borders in Poland and other places. So I just want to say that, again, you can always contact your local official's office. They should be able to point you in the right direction. But there are other things like, Guide Star and some other nonprofit kind of vetting agencies or, kind of websites where you can just check to make sure your money's going to the right place. So just want to make sure people don't lose sight of that. And we'll post that information, of course, as this war continues, unfortunately, into the future. So all that said, looks like we're going to be joined right now by our first guest for today.
Yes, hello, Alfonso. How are you?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on once again.
There we go.
Yeah, of course. We're always happy to have you here.
We're always glad to welcome back to the show Newsday Transit Bureau lead reporter, Alfonso Castillo. So he's all things transportation, and he gives us the background on what's going on.
And there's always a lot of moving pieces, pun intended, with the trains.
Yes, literally.
Exactly. So one of those moving pieces, though, was personnel at the top. Right. And I know we spoke to you not that long ago, right when previous chairman decided that he would be stepping down, Phil Eng, and now Catherine Rinaldi has taken the helm. And I know your colleague, Cecilia Dowd, rode basically on the train with her on her first day to work over in the Jamaica office. And I know you had a piece, kind of stating about the learning curve of being now not just the Long Island Railroad kind of chairperson, but also for Metro North still. So tell us, the takeaways from that article in their first 2 weeks, I guess, how they've been going so far.
Yeah, I think the reviews have been good. To a person, everybody thinks that Kathy Rinaldi is eminently qualified for the job. A lot of people have brought up that the job of the Long Island Railroad president is sort of, it's partly this managerial job. You're running an agency, but in some ways it's kind of a political job as well, in that so much of it is to be visible. And the president of the Long Island Railroad is one of the most visible, influential people on Long Island. It's a face that people are used to seeing all the time when things are running well, and maybe in particular when things are running badly. I think Long Islanders and Long Island commuters want a kind of a rapport, a comfort level with the president of the Long Island Railroad. And Phil Eng lived in Smithtown, took the train every day. And I think that's fairly typical of a lot of railroad presidents. They are Long Islanders. I think when folks heard that the president of Metro North is going to be running the Long Island Railroad, maybe there was some kind of skepticism. It's like, well, does she really know the area? And the fact is that she is a Long Islander. She grew up in Huntington and Massapequa. She held various jobs at the Long Island Railroad for a number of years before going to Metro North. So she does know the system. She does know Long Island. And because of that, again, I think folks that know her think that she's very much qualified. If there is a concern, it's just about being stretched thin. Certainly running the largest railroad in the U.S. is more than a full-time job. And in her case, she's running the two largest railroads in the U.S., in the Long Island Railroad and Metro North.
Simultaneously.
Simultaneously. And the reality is you just can't be everywhere at the same time. And so I think if there is a concern among some folks, it is that visibility question. How much can Kathy Rinaldi be around as needed? But she certainly seems intent on doing, both jobs to the best of her ability. And I would think, at least in these early weeks and months, not that the Long Island Railroad would be a priority, but I do think it is a priority for her to show that she can do both. And so I would expect to see a lot of her. And there was actually a news conference earlier this week at Penn Station talking about some of the improvements there. And she was the chairman of the MTA, Jan LIRR, introduced her as the president of the Long Island Railroad, and initially sort of forgot to mention that, oh, yeah, she also runs Metro North. So I do think, at least for the moment, that's sort of like the higher visibility position, because it's the one that's new to her.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think she's also going to be at a certain disadvantage when people compare her to previous people who've run those things without immediately realizing that she's running them both. You only had one.
And that means you have two riderships, kind of clamoring for different changes and wants and needs. But that means you also have two different sets of elected officials, who kind of represent those regions. And I know some of them are certainly, voicing their tentative concerns, saying that, like you said, they feel that she's more than capable of doing the job. But the idea is, for how long will it be, kind of that you have to share, this important role with the other, major, like you said, transit agency. And maybe to that point, I know Jan LIRR, obviously MTA, chair himself, was saying that it seems he really hasn't even started the discussion on when, the next replacement will even be considered. And I think he seemed to say that she would probably be in place until the completion of the two major projects that LIRR are running that I know we've discussed before, the third track and the East Side Access, kind of plan. So can you talk more about that, on why that seems to be the case?
Yeah, when news first came out about this, I mean, that was sort of the understanding, was that this was kind of a stopgap measure. And because East Side Access in particular is such a big haul, I mean, you're essentially creating another railroad, right? It's going to be a whole new branch running to a new terminal under Grand Central Terminal. It's unlike anything the MTA has done, in generations, really, since the creation of a lot of these transit agencies. And, use the word learning curve there. And there is a learning curve for Kathy Rinaldi. But at least as far as East Side Access goes, it's probably less than almost anybody else that is at the agency, because Metro North operates out of Grand Central Terminal. Certainly she knows Grand Central, and she has been a part of the planning and discussion for East Side Access for a number of years now. She's had a seat at the table next to Phil Lang, as so much has been worked out. So she gets up to speed very quickly. So in that sense, I think it's part of why there's been such a vote of confidence for Kathy Rinaldi, because East Side Access is so important to the MTA. And again, you don't want somebody who, you're onboarding and you've got to explain to them what East Side Access is and the differences between Grand Central and Penn Station. So, she can kind of hit the ground running. But since then, maybe because some of the reaction was so much kind of thinking, oh, well, this is just temporary. And I wonder who, and I use this in quotes, who our real next president or is going to be. Jan LIRR, I think it was a week or so after the announcement, made it clear Kathy's here for, until I say she's not here. For the foreseeable future. We're not searching for anybody to replace her. I don't want anybody counting on her not being here for the long haul. I think some of that, and he said as much, is because you want you want that vote of confidence for her. You don't want people looking at her as just a placeholder. A lame duck. But I think on one hand, you accomplish that. You create that sense of confidence. You make clear that she is the leader of the railroad. But I do think in some ways it also kind of exacerbates some of the concerns, especially among folks on Long Island and maybe Metro North as well, that this could be the arrangement for the foreseeable future. And both railroads kind of get half a president, and so some good and some bad there.
Well, there also has to be, as far as a managerial, layout, the way they have that, she's probably got a very good team in both situations. There's
Yes,
probably
absolutely.
somebody who could answer a Kathy Rinaldi question if the phone rang. And what are we going to do with, there's people that, so it's not like she's running back and forth with her pad trying to,
do we know,
put out fires,
Do we know though, Alfonso, like her teams, like either they stayed pretty much in place, the leadership structure right underneath thing, or were there a number of exits, kind of in those supporting positions, or has that not really been the case? It's really been just...
No, I do think her team in Metro North largely stays in place, and I think she kind of inherits Phil Lang's team at the Long Island Railroad. There's been no indication that, at least at the moment, that she's looking to make big changes to that team. I think she has been upfront and honest in saying that, Phil Lang, for all the criticism that the railroad often gets, and I know commuters, could be really fiery. It's hard to dispute that he left the place better than he found it. I mean, if you think about what the Long Island Railroad was like when Phil Lang came in, coming off, I think, back-to-back years of the worst on-time performance in something like 20 years,
right.
It's in better shape now. I think Catherine Rinaldi realizes that. Jana Lieber realizes that. I don't think they're looking to kind of like blow up, anything and restart it. And in her case, her number two at the Long Island Railroad is a gentleman by the name of Rob Free, who had been very visible at the Long Island Railroad in the last several months before Phil Lang's exodus, maybe kind of foreshadowing even that there was a change coming. And Rob's been at the railroad for going back to when Kathy was at the Long Island Railroad. They used to work together, so there's some relationship there. I think that's part of needs to be part of the discussion too. Is that, as it's not like Kathy Rinaldi is operating the train or something like that.
Right.
She's there for the big decisions, and day to day, both at Metro North and Long Island Railroad, there are people who are going to be running the place, and I think she feels, and the MTA feels, that those folks are in place.
Okay, so that's obviously good and confidence instilling. To remind our listeners that they are listening to this week's Long Island News here on 90.3 WHPC, the radio voice of Nassau Community College. Here with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and thankfully joined by Newsday's transit reporter, Alfonso Castillo. And to that point, I know Bill had raised the question last time regarding pay.
I still don't have an answer.
Yeah, it does look like they have an answer. Right?
It's worth following up again. And the official answer I got when I asked after we talked is TBD, to be determined. and maybe it's been determined by now. So it's probably a question worth asking. I don't think it is... it's fair to expect that she would be compensated for running two railroads versus one railroad. What that is, I don't know. We published the salary that she had as Metro North president, and I don't remember to the dollar, but it was in the range of $300,000 a year.
For one of those, right?
For one of them, yeah. No, I wouldn't count on it doubling.
I wouldn't want to be her accountant and have to tell her what she's going to owe in taxes at the end of it.
Oh boy, it would be a nice fee though. I'm sure, probably a nice accountant.
It's worth noting though that this is not really unprecedented. And some of this was news to me, but back I think in the early '90s there was. Peter Stengel, who was the Metro North president for some time, I think it was close to a year, ran both the railroads himself. And I spoke to Helena Williams, who ran the railroad when I was new on the beat. So it was like 2008 to 2007 to 2014. Another president with, I think, a pretty good reputation at the railroad. And she reminded me that for a while she was running the Long Island Railroad and all of the MTA. She was interim MTA director or president. I remember what the charge is. So it's not unusual for some time for somebody to be running more than one agency. Again, reflecting the reality is that there are other people there to help make those decisions.
Of course.
One of the things, and you spoke about the East Side Access. I was in construction at one point. We've been seeing plans for the East Side Access project for such a long time. It
goes back to the 60s, I think.
Yeah. One of the interesting things for me was to see the development of the 2nd Avenue subway. You spoke before about they're putting a whole nother thing in for the East Side Access. It's like a whole new, it's kind of was the 2nd Avenue subway. I couldn't believe they found enough room down there to dig the tunnels, and I mean, it was an incredible project. And to see it come to fruition and say, oh, okay, it's open.
That'd be nice.
Because everything happened underground. We didn't see a building go up. We didn't see, you know what I mean, where you can, day by day, you can see, wow, it was all underground. And all of a sudden you walk down the stairs and there's this subway tunnel and trains coming, and it's mind-blowing. It really is.
It's remarkable. It's one of the fun parts of this job is getting to see some of that stuff close up. I always say, my favorite days on the job are when I get to wear a hard hat and like an orange reflective vest. I actually got to do this early this week on another story. They're giving us a preview of some of the work going on at Penn Station. But I think on my Facebook, one of these like old memories popped up recently, and I think it was from 10 years ago, and it was the first time I toured East Side Access, and it was just a cavern. I mean, just blasted out a rock, and I remember we had to wear boots, and you'd be standing literally like knee deep in muck and mud, and it was as kind of raw as it got. And when I last toured last year, a few months ago, I kind of wasn't even aware where the tour started because it was finished. I mean, you were in a train station, and so it's really pretty remarkable. And again, this was, I think, October. It was Halloween. It was when Kathy Hochul came along on that tour, and it is. Largely done. And in fact, on that trip, we rode a train into Grand Central, which was the first. So the tracks are there, the platforms are there, the concourse is there, escalators, elevators. It's not that it's ready to go, but and they've said that the big work is pretty much done. And after whatever it's been, 60, 70 years of discussion, the idea is December of this year, people will take a train from Long Island into Grand Central Terminal. Oh, yeah.
I'm sure plenty of people will want to be there for that ribbon cutting. And knowing, like you said, when it comes to fruition, it's a lot nicer than just seeing it on paper and all the time it takes to get from there to the full 3D and everyone using it. Segueing, from that side of it to the COVID masking policies. Obviously, I know that the state, thankfully our Omicron wave has, for the most part, kind of not been an issue for the last few weeks here, and masking, whether it be in schools, other types of businesses, have been a part of this discussion, and them being kind of rolled back. But the trains are another part of this process, and I know you were a part, I think, of a larger article with some of your colleagues, speaking specifically about CDC guidelines and how I think March 18th might be more of the date for the trains.
I believe they just pushed that again, so now I think they moved it. I think the new date is April 18th. So it's at least another month now that you'll have to wear a mask on the train, the bus, the plane, all that stuff.
Right. Okay. So basically all the mass transit options still, that is the case. But, I'm taking the train pretty regularly now to work. And, I see that it seems most people, once you hear the press, like, oh, well, I don't have to do it for school. I feel like that's kind of, waning more and more. But, vaccination rates are up, thankfully, in the area. And, it's just interesting to see that now we're turning that corner, but maybe just a little bit longer, just for everyone's safety, of course, in a, kind of space where people are usually.
Obviously, I've heard people say kind of the last shoe to drop on the masking policies. You've got medical settings, hospitals, and some folks wonder if they ever go back to not wearing masks. But transportation is other public transportation. You're talking confined spaces with a lot of people coming from different area, different backgrounds. So there's a unique concern about it. Now the railroad and the MTA have said throughout that in some ways, certainly with the Long Island Railroad, you're safer there than you are in a lot of other places because of the rate of replacing the air inside the trains, the air systems that they have in there. But
about the purifiers and everything,
right. But I think there's also, for a lot of folks, it's just sort of like comfort level, right, and an uneasiness about it. So I'm not surprised to see the Long Island Railroad be kind of one of the last places to return to normalcy. And the other thing is, what was March 18th, now April 18th, is when the the TSA federal mask mandate lapses, the MTA and the Long Island Railroad are not bound by that. So they could choose on their own to extend it further. I've asked the MTA about that. And what they've said is, when the day comes that the TSA says that masks are optional, they'll essentially review their policy. They will look to the experts for advice and guidelines on what to do. But it should not be assumed that on that date, everybody is free to take their masks off on the Long Island Railroad.
I'm curious to how many people are going to continue to wear their masks, even though
that's a good point too. And I think and maybe there's a story here, because one of the things that's happening is for 2 years now, everybody leaves the house with a mask, in your pocket or maybe a couple. I know. If I go grab any sweatshirt or jacket in my house right now, there's got to be a mask somewhere in it. And now, because there are relatively few places where you're required to wear a mask, I think you're probably going to run into a lot of people not necessarily looking to be non-compliant or defiant, but just not carrying a mask with them. So you get on that train and you're checking your pockets and you just don't have one. So
don't have the box in the car anymore or something like that.
Yeah,
so
you just
like you said,
used to it.
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing that. I think bear out on my commute, but nonetheless, for now, I'm still going to have mine, and people, can do whatever you feel like you need to do. But point is that this is kind of also getting played out in real time, and I guess we'll stay posted to see what the guidelines change, and hopefully, this virus is for the most part leaving us, and this won't have to be part of the constant process. But meanwhile, just quickly here, Alfonso, in a few moments that we have you, I did want to just discuss another article you wrote in regards to the Suffolk bus lines. I know that there was a proposal by the county executive, Steve Ballone, that seemingly would cut about half of the service from about 42 bus lines to 21. It would increase maybe the frequency, but I know it's got a lot of people, kind of concerned about what this might mean for their commutes. So can you tell us, big picture, what that's kind of all about and what will happen next?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because I think it's a topic that's not being discussed that much. And, we still have some time before this would take effect. But this would be a sizable change in how people use public transportation in Suffolk County. And it's a system that, transports tens of thousands of people in Suffolk County, a lot of them essential workers, low-income workers, people of color. So this is a vulnerable bunch of people, for sure, people with disabilities, seniors, students. And you're talking about the most significant overhaul of Suffolk County Transit since it was created about 40 years ago. And in that time, like with all bus systems, there are tweaks here, a little more service on this line, a little less service on this line. And really what they're doing is, they call it reimagining, and that really is what they're doing. I mean, it essentially tearing down the whole system and rebuilding it from scratch. And, they say, and certainly there's point to be made, that for the majority of people using the bus and where demand is the highest, service will get better. There are, I forget, I think it's about a dozen lines right now where they have service every half hour. Those are the high frequency routes. That number would double. So there'd be a lot of folks would be waiting a lot less time for buses. The idea is to do a better job of synchronizing transfers at big transfer points. But for a lot of folks in areas where the bus routes, maybe the demand isn't as high, a lot of those would be going away. And, what Suffolk County says is, well, the hope, the idea here is that there would be some things that would provide similar bus service within walking distance. I don't think that's necessarily the case in a lot of areas. I mean, I looked at the map and you see a lot of routes just disappearing, and the nearest route being quite a distance away. Maybe for an able-bodied person, you could do that. But again, if you're talking about folks with disabilities or seniors, it might be a lot to ask them to walk that extra mile or so. So it remains to be seen. What they talked about when they first pitched this was two models that they were looking at, and they did seek feedback from the public on which to go with. And there was the ridership model, which is essentially where they ended up with, which prioritizes where is demand the highest, and let's put the resources where people are taking the bus. And then the other model was, well, let's evenly distribute it throughout the whole county so everybody gets some bus service. Right. Again, they ended up with the former. That's going to be good for some people, maybe not so good for others.
Yeah, well, of course. And that plays into the larger discussion of trying to get people to take the trains. But if you take a train, you need to get to your job, and there's no bus line there. That might change your equation. Same thing with getting students to Nassau Community College, et cetera. So
we'll be watching your Newsday writing. So
there's some public hearings on this topic at the end of the month, and I think people could go to Suffolk's website for more information on those.
Interesting.
Of course.
Interesting.
We encourage them to do that. Subscribe to Newsday as always, and follow Alfonso wherever he is on social media. Always covering the latest when it comes to transit and some other things. I know you even got a piece, I think, closer to your heart in terms of the wrestling beat, which I think you now with a resident, the reporter for. So, like I said, a little bit of everything for someone out there. But thanks again, as always, Alfonso. We appreciate your time, your perspective, and hope you have a great weekend.
My pleasure. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, John. Have a good weekend.
Take care, man.
You too. Take care, man. Be well.
Take care.
Thanks. And now we're very happy to welcome back to the show Newsday's lead energy reporter, who also covers local First Nations affairs, fisheries, and agriculture, Mark Harrington. Welcome. How are you?
Very good.
You are always covering an important beat because it impacts people's, pocketbooks and impacts a lot of the environment and climate change concerns. So I guess we wanted to start maybe with actually the larger picture, and then we'll get to maybe the more recent story you've done regarding the LIPA settlement. But people are obviously seeing their gasoline prices spike, but also utility rates are increasing throughout Long Island. It's not really a new deal, but it's about how much and what it's attributed to. So can you kind of lay out, what you're seeing, I guess, maybe from PSEG and from some of the other, service providers out here when it comes to rates increasing and consumers, kind of concerns about that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, most recently, we had a story, I think it was yesterday, the day before, about 40% of Long Island heats their homes with heating oil.
Yep.
That has spiked to a record high, and I don't believe it actually included the impacts of the most recent, sanctions against Russia in terms of importing that oil. So expect that to go higher. $5.25 a gallon, I think, was the number on Long Island, which was a record.
Yeah.
And what you're going to see is, I think, other forms of fuel. Most of the power plants on Long Island are, fueled with natural gas. As this, sort of geopolitical situation affects all energy prices, the trend has been generally upward. I mean, for LIPA, I think we saw maybe it was a 6% increase month to month, but 20% year over year increase in the power supply charge portion of bills, which is about half the cost to customers. So the good thing is that we're sort of coming to the end of the heating season, and days like today, you can actually open your windows and get some heat into your house. You're not so much reliant on the electric or the gas. But as a general rule, higher the prices go, the more you use, the bigger your bill is going to be. So people should be bracing, trying to conserve where possible, but bracing for higher prices, I think, for the next few months. And for, obviously for gas and other things, I mean, I think the driving season also changes prices, and some of those prices are expected to go on. They seasonally increase anyway. So that's coming as well. So it's not a good scenario. If you can find ways to conserve and to cut back on your use, you're in a good position right now.
There were some rumblings about people asking for the government to take the taxes off of the gasoline. Do you think that would ever happen?
It looks like it's going to have to, because there's no other relief in sight. I mean, there's just more news that seems to be sort of pumping things up. Oil has been really volatile, the crude oil really volatile in just the last 2 weeks with this war. But it looks like the pressure to do that may be strong enough where politicians who are savvy about that might find a way to do it. Sort of like where they release the oil reserves to help things out. So I think that could be happening.
Well, if they do that, then we'll know it's really bad. I just, you know, my knee-jerk reaction would be, they'll never do that. They'll just never do that. But
right, well, these are extreme times, and inflation is just so it's so through the roof at this point that, and those prices affect everything. It's not just the cost of gas to put in your car, but it's also affecting trucking and shipping and all those other things. So they all use that fuel, even airlines. I mean, the idea, I haven't checked prices on airline tickets lately, but those are also impacted by these fuel increases.
It's kind of like the perfect storm. All of these ingredients happening at the same time.
Exactly, and people really didn't expect it. I mean, we thought, okay, Russia's at war. Who knows what that means? And suddenly, it really affects everything.
Yeah. On the heels of the pandemic, of course, and already, the supply chain concerns kind of coming out of the pandemic. Now exacerbated by this, global conflict. And I know we're even discussing trying to, basically have better relations with Venezuela, some other oil-producing countries to maybe make up some of the gap with, where Russia, we will clearly not be doing business for the foreseeable future. But I guess in terms of those rates and these kind of record highs, so are we talking about then, the recession era, a lot of these records, is that when they were set? Or are we talking about the 70s, kind of when people who might recall it, think about those fuel line shortages and, utilities going up there. From your kind of perspective, like what is this more of, or what do you see this kind of becoming, I guess?
The economic picture was that for fuel oil, we hadn't seen this higher price. And it's the highest price since they began keeping this record, since New York State started doing it in 1999. But the nearest price, the nearest point at which it got that high was during the 2008 recession. Through the housing bubble, everything burst and prices went through the roof. And that's the last time you saw at least fuel oil, reach those highs. But natural gas is a little bit different of an animal. I mean, I think because of trading anomalies, the national grid bills in March may actually decline because they spiked so high in February. So that and the anticipation that people will be using less of natural gas means that you could actually see a slightly lower bill in March than you saw in February. But that's sort of an anomaly because I think the general trend is going to be upward partly because Europe now is looking to reduce its reliance on natural gas. So more of the U.S. natural gas is going to be shipped overseas. Anyway, any kind of supply constraint like that, any kind of issues like that, and just the market volatility generally is going to drive that up. So with that, LIPA had forecast a certain amount of pricing for customers for 2022. I think a lot of those projections start to fall away once these kind of prices hit home, even though they've hedged some of their bets and are anticipated some higher prices. When the market goes this crazy, it's kind of hard to do that. So people should really be bracing for ways to save or ways to lower your bill. The only way to really stabilize your bill is to find ways to use less, which is, either efficient new products, turning off lights and TVs and everything else. That's kind of the only way you have at this point to cut your bill.
Although
conservation and
I see, and maybe it's just my, could just be me, but I think in the future, like you go out for a ride in your car during the day and you're going to see a little bit less traffic.
Absolutely. And, this year and in December, actually, I bought an electric car. It's one of the lower priced ones, a Nissan Leaf. But I'll tell you that after feeling we sort of got it in at the end of the year, kind of felt like it was a good time, and driving it around for a couple of months, and then suddenly this happened, and I have solar panels on my house. So right now, in fact, literally right now, my car is being charged by sun power.
Wow.
And I haven't heard that from public officials, but in the end, it's those kind of decisions that you can make that sort of get you off of, somewhat off of the grid and somewhat off of, international dependence and market volatility that ultimately is going to save you money. I mean, it costs in the long run. My solar panels have been around for about 7 years now, and I don't have an electric bill. I just essentially pay a service charge every month of $12.
Okay, so basically your house generates enough electricity for you to charge your car.
And not pay a bill.
And not pay a bill. So the bill is a $12 service charge a month. I haven't bought gas in 2 months now, a month and a half. I haven't been to a gas station. So we use this Nissan Leaf essentially to drive just all the local things that we normally would have done in a gas-powered car.
Right.
Yeah.
Using the electric car. It's sort of a game changer, and I haven't been as sort of up all night thinking about filling up my old Jeep with it, for $85, and there goes a chunk of your paycheck.
Well, especially not getting in line to fill up your Jeep, because remember those days.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I do remember those.
I'm curious now, as they talk about the economics and the green idea and all this, but
renewable.
Do you think that we have an infrastructure that's strong enough to withstand everybody on your block plugging in a car?
We don't, in fact. And if everyone on my block did it, the transformer that's under the ground here would blow up. So LIPA is kind of realizing this. And I think anything that accelerates the transition to electric cars, for instance, LIPA needs to come and do a full assessment block by block of the capacity of these. Yeah. The transformer essentially takes higher voltages and cuts it down to usable levels for a street. If everyone on my street had an electric car, this transformer would not handle it, because I think it's like each electric car is like about a 50% increase in usage. Because it's like when I charge this car, you can see, it's almost a marked change, daily in my usage, because it's a 60 kilowatt hour battery. So filling that up takes a big chunk of energy. And so you're right. There is a lot of work to be done, especially if the heating part of it as well. And that's one of the stories that I wrote this week. Heat pumps are looking to change the equation from currently, as I say, most people are using gas or oil to heat their homes, but these heat pumps are essentially central air conditioners that also have heating capability. They use the same sort of same technology, but it's sort of electric, motor powered and Freon powered, but they use outside air to essentially as a heat sink to become a heating device for the winter, as well as a central air conditioning device for the summer. They're supposed to be more efficient, but and there's about 6,000 customers a year that are now sort of signing up for this, but that's a drop in the bucket for the 1.1 million Long Islanders who currently use other means for heating. But that too would put a real tax on the grid. So it's ultimately, they say, a better solution for heat. It certainly is that for air conditioning, but the question is the grid ready for that? Has LIPA done all the work to do it? So LIPA's in the process of assessing that now in PSEGLI.
Exactly.
I think those small steps might be a good thing, rather than by Christmas everybody's got electric cars. Oh no!
Well, there's certainly discussion within the budget. Trying to electrify state vehicles, the fleet, also school buses. I know there's different proposals that are trying to be put into the budget or pass as standalone legislation. And I know to the point that you raised, Mark, now as an electric car owner, that the state comptroller DiNapoli had put out a report previously about there just isn't the infrastructure in terms of not even at your home, but the way that gas stations are ubiquitous. Obviously, that's not the same way with charging stations for electric cars. Some places have them, but certainly not, at the scale that we would probably need if we do get everyone driving them. So that's one thing. But the other part is the back end on where the power is coming from, because it's good, obviously, to have the electric car. But like you said, it's natural gas. It's coming from potentially coal, whatever it may be. But to that point, I know you were part of covering the big announcement that was here on Long Island. Was earlier this year in terms of the governor, also the U.S. Department of the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, some other folks being out there to announce these new wind projects, which have gotten the green light and are kind of bring clean, renewable, electric power through wind to Long Islanders. So can you talk about that and how that kind of plays into, like you said, trying to get out of that volatile global marketplace for kind of traditional fossil fuels?
Right. Well, this is the South Fork wind farm. It's a 130 megawatt project. The turbines will be based off of Massachusetts and Rhode Island, but the cable comes into Wainscott in East Hampton, and it's essentially made to provide those 130 watts of megawatts of power primarily for the South Fork, which is really heavily energy constrained, and as they build more mega mansions, there's a huge amount of usage out there. So they built that project essentially to fill that gap. And at the same time, they've built up the infrastructure on the South Fork to accommodate that new power coming in, and also to import new power from the mainland. But over the next, say, 5 to 10 years, there's thousands of megawatts of additional wind power coming to Long Island. Some of it directly off the South Fork. Directly off of Long Island near Long Beach to Robert Moses. 15 miles from shore, there's going to be another close to 1,000, maybe ultimately 2,000 megawatts of power from Empire Wind 1 and 2 there. And last week they also announced last month, a lease auction for potentially thousands of more megawatts of wind power. So ultimately the plan is, and according to state law, the governor's, Climate Protection Act, by 2035, I think most of the state is going to be powered by renewables, solar, wind, and others. And so these projects are going to be supplying the bulk of our power. The question is, will they be ready enough to be able to turn off the existing power plants? They say they will be. How do they balance all that? There has to be a lot more energy storage around, big batteries that are going to be placed all around Long Island to replace these dirty little peak power plants that are pretty much everywhere right now and are used for the summer. So that transformation is underway. It's being accelerated by New York State and by the federal government, the Biden administration, after being kind of slowed down during the Trump administration. So it's happening, and that was the first kind of groundbreaking, but just a late-breaking piece of news I just read this morning. I'm actually working this morning about a lawsuit that was filed in federal court seeking to stop the work in East Hampton. Seeking an injunction to stop that work because of concerns about contaminants that are going to be dredged up while they dig the cable that connects the beach, the cable at the beach to the substation in East Hampton. So it has faced some vocal opponents and very well-heeled opponents in Wainscott. It looks like it's going to continue to happen throughout. There's always been these, waves of opposition to some of these projects from either fishermen, people who don't like the view shed, and also people who don't want a cable in their backyard.
Yeah. Is there any, just out of pure curiosity, is there any place in the world where the renewables are actually the lion's share of a country's energy?
Europe leads the way, I think, at this point. China is also certainly pushing it pretty hard, but Europe has been. I was in Denmark probably over a decade ago, traveling from coast to coast. They have them both offshore and on land. They're everywhere. And so Germany is also a leader. The UK has been pushing it pretty hard in the waters off of the UK. So they've kind of set the example. I think that there are still lessons to be learned from those places. It's not kind of a slam dunk. There are really a lot of balancing issues in terms of when you have not enough, when you have too much, wind power. So I believe the U.S. will learn from everyone and also get some economies of scale. Some of these new projects are coming in a lot less, priced a lot less than the former ones. So as they build a market supply chain here, that could help some of the pricing issues. The South Fork Wind Farm project, which is supposed to be the first, certainly for New York State, has very expensive power over the 20-year life, the 25-year life of the project, compared to other projects that are already contracted for New York. So pricing is an issue, placement and load balancing, and those are all issues that still need to be learned.
And not to mention the technology, right? I mean, if we go a few more steps where a wind can generate more than it does, or however they would make it work. Because I don't think there's any countries out there who are totally reliant on those kind of options.
Right. Well, it's always going to be a mix.
We're all still burning oil.
Exactly. Hydro, solar, maybe Copenhagen or other places might not have as much, kind of space like we do in the, Pacific Southwest to kind of have that be a part of a national plan. So to your point, Bill, of course, like you said, and Mark, it's not a one size fits all solution by any means. But, we're limited to what we can put, I guess, on New York kind of soil or the waters. But to that point, I know there was an article speaking from, I think, an NYSERDA executive, Doreen Harris, talking about just that, the electrified grid by 2050 could double. So can you talk a little bit about that, Mark?
Yeah, well, I think that what she's looking at is that electric cars and heating could both really drive, essentially a doubling of the the grid in terms of how much of it is powered, how many things are powered by the electric grid. So if you have especially with more chargers out there and other things, car chargers could make up a huge portion of this. If everyone essentially gets rid of their gas-powered car, you're going to need a lot more charging and a lot more voltage out on the grid to be able to accommodate that. The other part of it is heat pumps, and that's what she's talking about. If you can get people to stop using, filling up their oil tank in their basement, and really get the heat pump issue, all the issues down pat, and get it to a really competitive price, you could shift the current peak of the system. From what this official said, Doreen Harris, who runs it's called NYSERDA for the state, you could actually, change the peak, somewhat level it off, but also push the system to be more of a winter peaking, grid, which actually helps because wind farms produce most of their energy in the winter, not the summer. So if you can shift that, you're actually, making the grid more efficient. And I think that there are good reasons to do it, but there's a lot of work that needs to get done, including things like, having, shoring up the system with transformers. And you mentioned it before about chargers. I mean, that's one of the issues that I've experienced with my electric car, because it's so inconsistent. Tom Suozzi, in his bid for governor, had a press conference a couple of weeks ago talking about the controller's report about the lack of chargers across the state. And I was going to drive there with my electric car, but I saw that the charger where he was holding his press conference was, often not working and frequently hogged by a guy with a Tesla. So I said, I'm not coming. If I can't use that charger and I don't have enough power in my car to get there, it's not going to happen. So those issues, people talk about range anxiety of people who own electric cars. The guys who have Teslas don't really worry about it too much. They have 350 miles or more of range. Right. The Leaf that I have has about 200 miles there, and so it gets me just about anywhere to the outer edge of Long Island. But I can't leave Long Island as it now stands, and there's not enough chargers, I don't think, to fill me up in a way that I would feel safe or I'd feel comfortable traveling to, say, Pennsylvania or Washington D.C.
Yeah, so that's
a lot of work to get done.
Yeah, how long does it take to charge your car?
Well, I've set up a higher voltage charger at my house. It costs between $500 and $1,000 for the electrical work to have a 240 volt outlet put on the front of my house, and that takes between 4 to 8 hours up to 10 hours if it's totally empty to charge it. There are super fast chargers that are highly inconsistent, in terms of availability and pricing across Long Island. And those can take, maybe upwards of 2 hours to fill a fairly empty car. But again, I've paid a wide range of pricing, when you do it, it's just not consistent, and it's not always dependable. And if one other person is at the charger and you have to wait for 2 hours, it can really screw up your day. And I as a Long Islander, I'll tell you that when more people have electric cars, the day of fights at these chargers is coming. Yeah. Because if someone's there for 4 hours and another person's waiting, and this guy needs to get someplace, I could see it getting pretty nasty. So,
oh boy!
Just a prediction.
All the unintended consequences. We deal with them all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Not just fights at the gas pump, but fights at the electric charging station. Hopefully not. But point being is, you only got about maybe 2 more minutes here, Mark, and we do want to get to your most recent story, of course, about LIPA and the county executive making an announcement in terms of a settlement agreement there, and what we can expect that your reporting found from what's going on there.
Yeah, it's been years. I mean, the oldest of these suits are about 10 years old, and it's essentially just LIPA saying that the amounts that they pay in taxes for the big power plants, 4 or 5 of them on Long Island, the plants are way over assessed. And they want to lower those amounts by, roughly half over a glide path period. And there's been a lot of resistance locally by some of these, school districts and towns and villages, because what it means is less tax revenue. For years, they've depended on these these power plants and from LIPA and other LIPA ratepayers to give them, tens of millions of dollars, in one case more, annually to pay for the benefit of having a power plant in their area. These people have truly, suffered some of the consequences, big smokestacks and things. So the taxes have always felt like they were fair, but LIPA says they're way over assessed. You've got to cut them back. And they took these people to court. So now 2 of the suits have already been settled. Nassau County has been the holdout for the North Shore School District, or North Shore, the Glenwood Landing plant and the E.F. Barrett plant in Island Park. They want to lower the taxes roughly 50%, a little bit more than 50%, and everyone's looking for benefits in addition to that to settle, because it's going to mean some pain by people in those communities. So LIPA is aware of that. The districts don't want to give it up. The longer you delay, the longer you still get the money from LIPA, those annual tax payments. But Bruce Blakeman said yesterday that it looks like Nassau County may be nearing, finalizing or agreeing to a settlement with LIPA. We still don't know the terms. It's going to be roughly what that was. There may be some other, local benefits that help offset some of the real pain, related to that, lower tax payment, because it really does hurt. The money has to come from local taxpayers when LIPA lowers it, because most of the expenses are relatively fixed. Right. So people have to pay for that. Anyway, so it could be coming. There could be something more today or early next week. They're still sort of working out the final arrangements. But Bruce Blakeman, as the new county executive, did come in and say, for the benefit of the county, we do need to settle this. The real problem is if it goes to trial and they lose, they face $500 million or more in immediate penalties for back taxes. So it's a real problem.
Right. So initially the court case was about the tax rate from now going forward.
Right. Well, I mean, the taxes are the cases are always about getting back taxes and getting, that's the double pronged sword, fork here, that you have to pay both what you owe for the years that the lawsuit was filed, and then change the new taxes going forward. So in this case, they would owe, hundreds of millions of dollars in back taxes, and that's always been the case. But what they would do is they would settle it, and those back taxes would be forgiven as long as they took a settlement for the future and agreed to a roughly 50% cut in taxes over 7 years. Right. So we'll see what he says, but it's a breakthrough, I think, for Nassau County. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's certainly a test of leadership here.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you. As always, subscribe to Newsday and follow Mark at Mark Harrington News and anywhere else he's posting this information. Look forward to having you on again. Like I said, discuss some of those other important issues here, especially around budget season. So thank you, Mark. Have a great rest of the weekend.
You too. Thanks very much.
Good talking to you again. We'll talk to you soon. Yep. Thank you.
Same here. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to move right on out of here. We thank you for joining us. Remind you can catch this week's Long Island News every Friday at 3 p.m. right here on 90.3 WHPC.